Chapter 2. Monday night arrived. Within the silence of my apartment, I swept my hair back into a tight bun and glanced at my reflection in the mirror with a discontented sigh. Though I rarely was concerned with my appearance, I suddenly wished I had something more intriguing to wear besides the bland, muted tones of my oversized work shirt. I loaded my supplies into the trunk of my car and drove through the soft blanket of early evening and up the steep driveway to August's house. I reflected on the tiny bundle of nerves that had settled in the pit of my stomach. The mere thought of seeing him again filled me with a strange sense of anticipation. There was something about him that captivated me with a reckless curiosity. I parked and made my way to the door, lugging the heavy cleaning bag over my shoulder. A faint light shone through one of the kitchen windows. Before I had a chance to knock, I heard the soft tone of August's voice from inside. "Please, come in, Jezebel." Turning the handle, I stepped tentatively into the shadowy warmth of the house. August stood facing the window with the curtains drawn open, the pale shimmer of the setting sun engulfing him. Through the glass, I could make out the waves, dancing with the warm tones of reflected light. Lost in the depths of his thoughts, August did not turn to greet me. An awkward silence hung thick in the air, punctuated only by the rhythmic tick of a mantel clock sitting above the fireplace. "Hey there, would you mind if I turn on a few more lights?" I asked, my breath breaking the silence. "It's pretty dark in here." August moved from the window and flipped a switch on the wall, illuminating the house in a warm glow. "Is that better?" His dark hair fell in disheveled waves against his face and lightly brushed the shoulders of his indigo suit as he walked toward me with a smile. "I do apologize. I enjoy the view unobscured by artificial light." The concentrated burn of his gaze caused my heart to accelerate while I adjusted to the brightness. I smiled nervously, unaccustomed to this awkward version of myself. "Yes, this is much better, thanks." "Let me know if you need anything, Jezebel. I will be upstairs working." After a quick nod, I moved to retrieve the cleaning supplies I had left near the door, and when I looked back, he was already retreating up the stairs. As I listened to his footsteps creaking softly above me, I wondered what kind of world he dove into, with his stacks of papers and gold-plated fountain pens. I spent the next hour eradicating the thick dust from the living room. The canvas cloth had been removed, and judging from the paintings on the walls, I had expected the furniture and decor to be antique as well. I liked the idea that this house stood untouched, with its secrets frozen in time, but everything was surprisingly modern. Only the grand piano that loomed in the far corner with its ebony wood slightly faded whispered of times long ago. I had always loved the piano, with its smooth, smoky tones that sparked a sense of nostalgia and evoked memories of late winter nights curled up by the fireplace as a child, with Bach playing softly in the background as the hushed voices of my parents filtered in from the kitchen. Running my cloth across the surface, I rested my fingers over the ivory, pressing gently upon a key and eliciting a single mournful note which resonated throughout the room. "I see you have met Abigail." Startled, I turned to find him standing beside me. His hands were clasped in a graceful sweep behind his back that reminded me of an old painting. "You named your piano?" I find that fact somehow charming as I shot him a playful smile. "I take it you play, then." He nodded as warmth danced in his eyes, softening his expression. "I've always wanted to learn how to play," I said with a sigh. "Why don't you, then?" he asked. "I haven't had the time, I guess." "Ah, time." His voice trailed off as he glanced out the window, appearing to be momentarily lost in his thoughts again. "I would give you some of mine if I could." A tired smile flickered across his face, and suddenly I saw a lonely man, a man weighed down by something heavy. "I would really love to hear you play sometime," I said, hoping my words would prompt him. He looked at me curiously, as if trying to gauge my interest. "Would you?" "Yes, I would." He moved past me and sat on the bench. For a moment, his hands lay still upon the keys, hovering in the silence that filled the space between us. When he began to play, the music that flowed from his fingers started slow and haunting, then developed into a rich melody. I stood there beside the piano, overcome with a yearning and an abrupt pang of sadness that caught in my throat. Entranced and held captive by this intimacy he was unexpectedly sharing, I could not hold back the sudden emotion that pooled within me. As he closed with a soft finish, I realized I had been holding my breath. I let it out in one long sigh. Wow, that was really beautiful. August looked up at me, noticing my tears. I smiled and went to wipe them away, letting out an uncomfortable laugh. Well, I guess you made me cry. He took me in with his cobalt gaze, soft and filled with sincerity. Well, I am honored to have moved you. My fingers absent-mindedly ran across the top of the piano. Did you write that yourself? A hint of sadness flickered across his face. Yes, I wrote that for my late wife. His voice was full of melancholy as his eyes trailed to the window, seeking out the ocean through the darkness. I had a sudden longing to reach out and touch him. I recognized his sorrow, like a palpable weight around him. The feeling was familiar, for I carried my own pain pressed tightly against my chest. I'm so sorry for your loss. August nodded and rose from the bench. He brushed past me as he strolled into the kitchen, leaving me alone with the fragmented feelings his music provoked. For a moment I stared at the loneliness that curled around me like a relentless shadow, the gaping hole in my heart that pulsed like a wound that would not heal. Would I ever find my happiness? Did I even know what happiness felt like? As I struggled to regain my composure, August came up from behind and slipped a cool glass of water into my hand, his arm brushing against mine as he lingered over my shoulder. Thank you for sharing that with me, I said as I took the glass to my lips, realizing how thirsty I was and grateful for the cool liquid which slid down and quenched my dry throat. You know, it takes a certain type of person to listen honestly and feel the story behind the music, he said, his voice like a warm whisper teasing my neck and causing a faint tingle of goosebumps to run down my back. Thank you for listening. I turned to him. Our proximity filled me with a sudden rush of adrenaline, and I grew dizzy, my breath momentarily caught as I fell into the depths of his gaze, completely untethered by the intensity of his eyes, which swirled in a palette of blue tones. Who was this man? And why did I feel so overcome by him? August withdrew from my side with a nod and retreated up the stairs, abruptly leaving me devoid of warmth. I managed to retrieve my senses and went back into the living room to resume cleaning. My fingers trailed over the books lying neatly on a shelf beside the couch, my eyes falling to one in particular, tucked conspicuously in between the laminated spines of reference and history. When I pulled out the faded leather-bound book, it rested large and heavy in my hands. Inside held paper made from the soft parchment of linen, with cursive script in a language I could not decipher scrawled upon the pages. There was something ancient and mysterious that pulled at me as my fingers traced over the text, noticing faint smudges left from the ink that had bled and blurred the words. The creak of footsteps upstairs startled me, and realizing I was snooping, I quickly closed the book, placing it delicately back on the shelf. The hush of evening had gathered around the house like a heavy cloak when I realized it was almost 7. I picked up my pace a little, working my way through the dining room and into the kitchen before heading upstairs. Hello? I called out, expecting to find August there, but the room was empty. As my eyes fell on the bed veiled in partial shadow, something about it pulled forth an obscure longing that I could not define. Feeling flushed, I turned and opened the sliding glass door, stepping out onto the deck. The cool breeze ruffled my hair and brushed across my skin like a whisper. I gazed out into the darkness of the landscape, perplexed as to where August had disappeared to, when I saw the faint outline of a man below me. August stood atop the cliffs, gazing pensively out to sea as if he was searching for something. Mesmerized by his stillness, I watched him like a voyeur, one that had slipped quietly and unannounced into his private moment. I took a step back to give him his privacy, turning to close the door behind me, only to find he had disappeared into the darkness. Silence encompassed the room, filled with a heavy energy that pulled at me as I began to clean. Throughout my years of being in other people's homes, I was always left with an impression, as if the room itself retained an essence, memories and emotions that etched themselves upon the walls like an invisible narrative. I ran my fingers down the length of his bedspread, the silk cool to the touch, and I wondered what lives had been lived here, for within this room I sensed a deep undercurrent of love and sorrow. As I finished up and gathered my supplies, making my way downstairs, August emerged in the hallway. "Let me help you with that." He carried my oversized duffel bag up to the car while I followed. After I loaded up the trunk, he pressed an envelope into my palm, eliciting a small electrical current that made my skin tingle as his hand brushed against mine. When I looked up to thank him, his eyes lingered on mine, the darkness faintly illuminated by the dome light of my open door. "I hope to see you next week, Jezebel." His tone was somber, causing me to reply in an overly cheerful inflection. "Well, that was the arrangement. Once a week, right?" "We shall see." I stared at him, trying to gauge what his obscure remark implied, as I gave him a nod and slipped into my car. My eyes glanced into the rearview mirror, watching him fade into the shadows as I drove down the dark road toward home. It wasn't until the next morning, as I sat at my table with a cup of coffee and the week's balance sheets before me, that I opened his envelope. Inside, I found a large check and a note. I unfolded the paper and read the flowing cursive script. Ego dui tangri ti. The words looked familiar, and I realized it was the same vernacular I had seen scribbled within the pages of the leather book I had found on his shelf the night before. I quickly did a search on my phone for the translation. My heart skipped a beat, and a warm flush surged through my body. It was in Latin, and translated to, "I long to touch you."